Welcome to Pivotista, where we turn life's biggest transitions into your boldest breakthroughs. I'm Kristy Cook, your guide to navigating life's twists and turns with clarity, confidence, and purpose. Today, we're diving into a powerful conversation about resilience, reinvention, and the courage to start over. My guest, Katie Wall, knows firsthand what it means to rebuild after life throws the unimaginable your way. A former teacher turned financial advisor and certified financial planner, Katie is a fierce believer in the power of a pivot and planning backwards. After being unexpectedly widowed at the age of 33, Katie found herself at a crossroads. Instead of letting grief define her, she reimagined her career, her community, and her future, driven by one burning desire to fully embrace this one wild and precious life. Once a middle school teacher of the year, Katie now runs a thriving financial practice in North Carolina with Edward Jones, where she guides others to make intentional, empowered choices about their financial futures. She also dedicates her time to serving on 2 nonprofit boards and focuses her work on 3 powerful pillars: asking the right questions, deep listening, and continual self-reflection. And if that wasn't enough, she also serves as her husband's strongest sounding board and advisor as he builds a new business. In today's episode, we're talking about what it really takes to start over, not just in theory, but in action. Katie will share the hard-earned lessons she's learned about resilience, risk, and planning for the unexpected. We'll talk about how courage isn't about being fearless, it's about moving forward despite the fear. This conversation is for you if you've ever wondered, can I really start over? Or what if I fail? Get ready, because today we're learning how to bet on ourselves first. Let's dive in. Katie, welcome. Thank you so much for joining me. I've been so excited to talk with you. Not only are you the very first guest on the Pivotista podcast, but it means so much to kick off these conversations with someone who truly embodies what it means to pivot with purpose. Your journey is such a powerful testament to resilience and reinvention. You went from being a middle school math teacher to a successful financial advisor and certified financial planner, navigating one of the hardest personal losses imaginable along the way, all at an extremely young age. That kind of pivot doesn't happen overnight. It takes deep reflection, courage, and a willingness to step into the unknown. I'd love to start by having you take us back to that moment. What was it like to find yourself at such an unexpected crossroads, and how did you begin to reimagine what was next for you?
Oh, such good questions. And when you read back over that bio, I have to take a minute and just go, wow, that really does embody where I sit right now. And that's very grounding and a little bit humbling to think back on. But when I go back to that very beginning moment when I realized my, as I call it, my castle just kind of burned down right before my eyes, the first thing I felt was very vulnerable, and realizing that the rug that I thought I was just going to fly through life on was just ripped out from under me, and trying to figure out, okay, well, what now? And I was really lucky to have a really great support system. I have wonderful parents who just sat with me and met me where I was every day, my stepsister included. And one of the first things we did after things settled down was have a lot of conversations about what now. And I don't know if other people have these kind of conversations with their parents, but my conversations were, okay, well, if I'm now the sole breadwinner in my life and I'm in this boat, not alone, but I am my household now, I am my house, what paths would I be interested in? And what paths would lead me towards a bigger vision of what I want to do, because that changes. And we talked through every single one of them, and I thought through every single one of them, and several of them led me to really promising visions of life, but they weren't quite the vision of life I had. And one did help me meet all the visions of life I had then. But that what now moment can lead us down a lot of different paths. It can lead us down the path of an opportunity is a tough word to say as a widow, but the path of opportunity or the path of despair. And I chose the path of opportunity every day. And that was a very conscious choice to choose it every day. And I still choose it every day.
Wow, the path of opportunity. How were you able to make that choice? It seems so wise. I'm thinking, at 33, how were you able to lean into that mindset of choosing the positive instead of the negative?
Yeah. Two ways. One, a really good therapist. I leaned into a grief counselor and therapist on a weekly basis and then slowly moved to biweekly and monthly, but leaning into a really good therapist that I could be very honest and vulnerable with, because it isn't my family's job. It wasn't my friend's job to be my therapist. You need a professional. We all need a professional to lean into. So that was a big piece of having really open conversations. And then the second was I had a really great career. After becoming a middle school teacher, I was like an analyst for a school district, very well respected in my school district. I say that, I assume so, but very well known. I had a lot of rapport with everyone in the school district, and I was asked to be in a lot of meetings. My voice was one that people wanted to hear. And I remember sitting and realizing that I had this choice of careers and choice of paths, and I really wanted some really wise advice. And I remember sitting in a room filled with some of the top leaders in the organization, and I thought, well, if there's anywhere I can get advice from, surely I can get advice from this room. And I started looking around and started thinking through what advice I was looking for, and I realized there was no one in that room that could really give me objective advice on what I really needed. And it was a really big aha of I'm in the wrong room for what I want to do. So both those things, really good therapy. Let's lean into the professionals and then recognize, are you in the right room? Are you in the right room for where you want to go? That's a tough decision and it's a tough realization, but it's an important one.
It is. And how did you find your right room? I know you had these conversations with your family and your therapist, and but a lot of what we talk about when we're talking about pivoting is the power of small intentional steps. Um, but I'm always curious, how is it before we embark on those steps? Do we feel that intuitional tug that not only is our current path not a fit for us, but how do we have faith that our next one is?
Yeah. So a lot of times our circle is surrounded by the people that we work with, and we have a bad habit, particularly these days, of letting that be our only circle and our only circle of influence. And the reality is, there's a lot of circles out there that have a lot of different pieces of wisdom and influence. And I was lucky enough to have another circle of influence. I had friends through church, and then I also had my first husband's circle of influence. He was a financial advisor, and so I was surrounded by a ton of financial advisors. And because we give advice for a living, because financial advisors give advice for a living, it's very hard for that advice not to be poured out, whether it's asked for or not. So I was very intentional about listening to a lot of different voices, because solicited or unsolicited, I need to make sure that the voice in my head is mine, after all the other voices have poured in. But I knew that when it looked at the bigger picture, the goals I wanted to achieve, The wisdom I could get from other circles was more objective than the wisdom I was getting in mine. So being aware of your circles, and maybe there's a filter on some of those circles, and being aware of that and opening yourself up to more circles to take down that filter and increase the objectivity.
It makes so much sense. And what I also really heard in there, you'd said, the voice in my head is mine, and that ultimately is what I need to listen to when I'm deciding whether or not I make a pivot and what that pivot looks like. But certainly there were some little voices creeping in, the shoulds, what I like to call the shoulds. How did you quiet the shoulds and the pressure to stay the course and keep your head down and just keep on the same path that you put so much effort and energy to get to?
Nobody wants to be shoulded on. That's one of my favorite sayings. And then we're the worst at shoulding on ourselves, saying what we should and shouldn't do, but just recognizing that one piece. But I think, and I actually learned this in therapy, one of the healthiest things you can do if you tend to be a naysayer in your own head is to go ahead and play out the worst case scenario. Just go ahead and play it out. Play it out in a safe environment, not after 2 glasses of wine and with other catastrophizers, but play it out in a safe environment. Therapist is a helpful place. And work through that. What could the worst possible scenario be? And for me, it was failure. What if I absolutely fail and I fall on my face? And that's a tough scenario because what's the reality of that? But if you start to play out all the possible scenarios, what you actually see is that statistically, I'm a math person. I know statistically is not our favorite word, but I'm going to use it. Statistically, the worst possible scenario is often the least likely scenario. And the more likely scenario is it ends up somewhere in a more positive way, at least in the middle or even better than you imagined. And being very realistic about those different scenarios and the possibility of them, and then thinking through the worst possible scenario and going, okay, what can I do to prevent that? And then the worst thing that happens isn't the worst possible thing that could have happened because you put something in place to prevent it. That was one thing. And then the other, and we mentioned this earlier, but betting on yourself. If you're going to bet on anything at all when you make a pivot, it's to bet on yourself. And if you are going to put all of your eggs in the basket of you, put up protections, think up the worst possible scenarios, put those in place, but then wake up every day betting on you. And what would the winner of you do every day?
Oh, so many amazing nuggets in there. Oh, I love it. And, in some of our past discussions, you mentioned that you plan backwards. Is that what you mean when you're talking about, analyzing the stories that we tell ourselves and then really putting into reality, sitting down and figuring out, is that just a story or is that fact? And if it did go wrong, I can prepare myself for that in advance. So even if it goes the way I don't want it to, I'm prepared.
The story versus fact is actually a really important mental workshop I think all of us should do. I used to be a trainer for something called Crucial Conversations, and that's one of the first things we did was walk through, okay, is this story an opinion or is it fact? And it is so enlightening of all the things we tell ourselves and the very few pieces of them that are actually facts, and to turn our perceptions into what are the actual facts, what are the observations. It's really important. But planning with the end in mind is part of that. Okay, how do I absolutely make sure that what I want to happen happens in some way? And that's putting barriers in place. And it's also planning backwards of if I want this level of lifestyle, what do I need to make happen to ensure that happens without any interruption? And there's going to be things that shift a little bit, but when we plan with what our final vision should look like, with what, and I'll say this, what we want our obituary to say, it really simplifies life. It really simplifies what our everyday actions are. It changes the mental conversations that we have with ourselves of, should I do this or should I do that? Well, what did you want to say by the end? What did you want life want to say by the end? Does this accomplish that? And it's a very simple yes or no by that point.
Yeah, absolutely. And it seems like that exercise also really helps to put in front of us what's actually important and what isn't. What is this worth my time and energy to be upset about or stressed about or nervous about? And when you plan with the end in mind, that obituary sort of look back, what do I want my life to have looked like? It really does help sort out all of the stories that we let creep in that end up being just time wasters. I'm curious, with your, okay, so you've done all the planning and you've got that intuitional alarm going off that you're pretty sure this is going to be the right path for you. You've done the research. When you were ready to get started, what were those steps that you took?
Ooh, ooh, so many. So the first was, and sometimes this is the hardest one, of letting that first life know, hey, we are breaking up. And that's a big decision in itself. And that's a big conversation in itself. So preparing for that conversation, because there's going to be parts of that life that want you to come back. And maybe it's the comfort, or maybe it's friends, maybe it's influences, maybe it's family that says, I know this, you think this is a good idea, but we just think this isn't good for you. So going ahead and preparing for that breakup and preparing for how big of a breakup is needed. For me, I ended up moving from the town I was in, which I miss dearly. I do miss it absolutely dearly, but it's just down the road. I can go back anytime. And then reestablishing a new circle. And for me, that was part of the grief process too. I needed to reestablish myself in a new way for my second marriage as well, to give it the best possible roots and foundation. But that's that first step of feeling really comfortable with what that breakup looks like, who and what is healthy and supportive to bring with you, and who do we need to separate ourselves from a little bit. And that's hard
Very
because
hard.
those are very established relationships, and maybe they're not prepared to break up, or maybe they're not prepared to tether the relationship and they feel like it's them and they've done something wrong. That's on them. That's not for you to fix. You're going to have enough. So everyone else's feelings about what you're about to do are not your problem. So there's step 2, understanding that everyone else's feelings about what you're about to do are not your problem. And then, I'm really simplifying this. It's a cadence of many, many steps every day. But step 3 is taking that leap one little step at a time so that you can continue momentum forward. And what I mean by that is sometimes we say things like, but I'm going to wait until. Wait until doesn't help us keep momentum forward. It's the past saying, but you're not ready. You're not going to be ready. You're not going to ever wake up and go, all right, today's the day. That's just not likely. What's more likely is you keep finding reasons to put things off because you feel like you're not ready, and that's not healthy. You have to continue your steps forward and continue your momentum, because previous is going to keep pulling you back. And then the last piece of that I'll say, because there's so many different ways to do it, is recognizing that resilience isn't taking that leap the first time. It's waking up every day and going, and I'm going to continue to move closer to my vision, no matter how bad or what yesterday brought, no matter how comfortable it will be to go back. My previous career was wonderful. I felt like a master at many of the pieces, and it was very comfortable. And this, suddenly I'm taking exams that I go, I don't know what these words are. I'm going to have to look up a dictionary for the first time in a while. I don't know any of these people. I'm wildly uncomfortable in this room because I don't even know names, never mind, I've established rapport and trust with people and can go say, hey, what do you think about this idea? Hey, I have a question. I don't even know people's names. So having that mental acuity to be prepared that every day when things are uncomfortable, you're going to continue to at least take a step closer to your pivot and into your pivot and leaning into it.
Yeah, all of that hits so home for me. And I feel like we must have been living parallel lives because, when I made the switch from being a business attorney to a coach now, it was all the things that you're talking about, the constant pull to make sure I still say, and I'm a coach, but I'm also an attorney. And that it's okay to step into those new identities. Just because you're really good at something doesn't mean you have to do it forever if it doesn't light you up. And then just really every day choosing to continue on this new uncomfortable path that you don't have the expertise yet developed into, because that's really where we grow, that's where we thrive. And in our first career, we didn't start off day one as an expert. So that really,
Yes.
really, really touches my heart to hear you say that. And how comforting is it too to also hear, like, oh, well, when we pivot, it may feel like we're on this journey alone, but other people who pivot go through the exact same thing and the exact same fear, the doubts, and they are able to reach within themselves, hopefully, and pull out that resilience to keep going, even through the discomfort and uncertainty.
Indeed. There's statistics out there that the average entrepreneur is actually well into their 40s. It's not the 21-year-olds and 22-year-olds. The average entrepreneur is well into their 40s. And if you're not sure about your support system, if you're questioning, okay, this is different than anyone I know of what they've done, lean into books. There are so many stories of pivots in books. Just set your audible on every single story. So that's in your subconscious as well. And you're listening to that and you're hearing those stories. Because even though we do feel lonely, sometimes there's so many people going through pivots, and there's so many people who have already been on this path and have gone through all the thoughts you're having too. They've struggled with family questions. They've struggled with friend questions. They've struggled with the feelings of isolation. They've struggled with the but what ifs. People have gone through it before. Lean into those. Lean into the wisdom of others. There's so much of it.
Yeah, our community really build that support. And it doesn't need to be a massive community. Like you said, it can be books, it can be a Facebook group, it can be, even just one person that you can talk to who's gone through some pivot. That and it doesn't even need to be identical. Like we just said, our journeys were totally different, but we experienced so many of the same things. And I'm curious. So I think we also, especially high achieving women, we have a tendency to put so much pressure on ourselves that when we do step in to our pivot, we decide we're going to do it. We've done all the planning. We've read all the books. We have this idea that sort of overnight we need to be this rock star in this new path. And I hear your story and I hear all that you've gone through, and clearly you've done so much work on reflecting and learning and growing. But I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit more about that so that we don't leave people thinking, oh, just overnight you're ready to go when you're on this new pivot.
True story. I continue to reflect on, there's a quote, and I'm going to absolutely murder it, but there's a quote about the number of people who are thinking that they're crushing it, and they're actually just mediocre at the job. And then we sit here and go, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know what I'm doing. And there's a lot of vulnerability in there if you let that really evil voice in your head be the loud one. That's where we lean into our vision, because we didn't take this pivot because we thought we knew nothing. We leaned into this pivot because we had a skill set and we had a vision and we had a passion. and because we saw a need in the world. And so our goal is to every day learn a little bit more, but more so learn a little bit more about people and get curious about their stories and let that drive our education. So, for example, the topic is women pivoting. And one question there is what made each woman want to pivot? What was the trigger? And what's the fear? And so, on a financial planner side, my two thoughts that I would want to dig into for curiosity and for my own learning are what's the trend happening with women right now where they're finding a need to leave something comfortable and going to something uncomfortable? What's happening? What's happening in the bigger economics? What's happening in culture? What's that? Let me do research on that. And then, what's the discomfort and the fear? And how can I, as a financial planner, help protect them and help them feel protected and sleep better at night? And then, going back to what we just said, that there's plenty of people who have done this before. Let's do research on the success stories. Let's do research on the team that they created around them. Let's do research on what they had in place. What was the legal infrastructure? What was the financial infrastructure? What was the emotional infrastructure they had in place? What's available? All right, look at all that I've just learned from that one question of curiosity. And that's a piece missing in the world. We like to look at people's stories and just judge and not ask any more questions. But the curiosity leads to the questions. And more powerful than answers are powerful questions. And so I lean into the really hard questions first because it helps me learn. It helps me learn more skill sets. It helps me learn about people. And it makes me better as a human more than anything else.
Yeah, and it sounds like you also ask those hard questions of yourself too.
No, every day. Every day. I get so annoyed with myself. Hey, it's quiet time now. We're done. We're going to put on some classical music and you're going to stop. You're going to stop with this thinking thing.
Yeah, time out.
Time out. Let's take a time out.
Well, so over time, these years that you've been on this journey to get to where you're at and, kicking butt in the financial advising world, what is, looking back, what is something that has really surprised you about the journey to get here from that initial decision to pivot?
That is a great question. And I don't think I've ruminated on that question. I think something that's really surprised me is how much I enjoy certain pieces and I am fulfilled by certain pieces because I knew that there were going to be parts that really let me live my life comfortably and surround myself by people I truly loved spending time with. I think one of the things that surprised me is how much that's actually overfilled my cup in some ways. Some days I'll have a conversation with someone and I'll just have to sit for a minute and go, wow, I am really lucky to sit in this seat and to be a part of this conversation. And how humbling but fulfilling that is. Because we're making some of the most important decisions of people's lives and often some of the most difficult. And being someone that people call for these very vulnerable conversations means a lot. It means a lot. It means more than I thought it would. The other thing is I talk about resilience a lot. I'm continually surprised how much more I need. I don't feel like I've climbed and obtained the mountain of resilience, so to speak. I feel like it's a muscle that is never completely worked out. It's a mountain that I never feel like I will reach the top. It's something that is a continued tool that needs to be utilized and honed in on. Those would be two of the bigger ones. There's probably more if I really thought about it, but that's a good question. I'm going to think on that more.
Well, as you're looking back into the past, what is one thing that you wish you had known that you know now when you were getting started?
Sometimes I tell myself I wish I had known that widowhood wouldn't have been my only bowl of poo that I would get in life. But then I think, well, would that have changed things for the worse? If you had known earlier, would that have changed things for the worse? So I'm a big believer that you know what you know for a reason, and you don't know what you don't know for a reason, and you will be opened up to new knowledge when you're ready for it. I wish I had told myself earlier that I was going to move towards a deeper knowledge than I ever really thought possible, and a deeper understanding of wealth management than I ever thought possible. I wish I would have told myself or knew that earlier, because the world is so much more complex than it was even 2 years ago, 4 years ago, 5 years ago. It's so much more complex. And I wish I would have known how much love I would have had for the very intricate strategies and the very nuanced strategies of how I'm able to help people.
Well, and I am positive, I have no doubt that that love that you have pays dividends to your clients, because you just come at this with such a fresh perspective and unique perspective. And I'm curious, for our listeners that are toying with the idea of pivoting or making a major change, a minor change in their life, what one piece of advice do you have for them to help them get unstuck and start and take a chance on that dream?
Yeah. You only get one chance at life. But do you? I mean, we're talking about pivoting. We're talking about all the different ways you reinvent yourself. So I would say, one, don't be afraid of mistakes. You're going to make them. Just go ahead and accept it. You are going to make mistakes. That is a definitive. That part you're going to have to push aside. Accept it, move forward with it. When you're thinking about that vision of where you want to be, we get really good at vision boards and putting up these wonderful words for us. But the words aren't what make a vision, it's the picture and specifying that picture. What exactly does that look like? Be careful making it too generic and make it as specific as possible. And be sure, and sometimes this takes a therapist, that the vision for your life that you're shooting for isn't about you running from something. Make sure it's about you running to what you want. As far as we've come, there's still so many things that tell us what you should and shouldn't, what works and what doesn't. Good advice, be what it may, and well intentioned, the only person who knows exactly what's right for you will always be you. So bring in as many opinions as you need and then filter those down to what is your vision and what helps you meet that. And make sure that when you're running towards it, you're running towards it for the right reasons, and get a second opinion from a professional if needed.
Oh, I love that. Running towards it for the right reasons, and that because you can't be passionate about something if you're not running towards it for the right reasons, because change is difficult. And I also love the idea of the vision board being an image. So often in the work that I do, we talk about the importance of visioning. And the reason why is because our brains don't know the difference between what it's viewing in real time versus what we are visualizing when we really get in there and do like a deep dive vision. And so you can almost kind of trick your brain into believing that this vision you hold for yourself is accurate. It's going to happen. It's what's going to happen in your life and make your life better. And so I just really, really love that suggestion of incorporating images into the vision board instead of just the words and the phrases. It's so good. And so as we wind down, I just have to say how blown away I am by this. You are just, it's so incredibly insightful. And I think if you ever wanted to have a third pivot towards coaching, you, outside of the financial advising, could write your own ticket. But since your passion is with financial advising for folks, how can people get in touch with you?
Sure, absolutely. So I'm always open to having a conversation. There's no obligation and no cost to chat with me, but rather, if you just want just a second opinion of where you are and taking a better look at things, or just want someone to ask some really tough questions, or just love you, whichever one you're seeking, I enjoy doing both. But please feel free to reach out on my website, edwardjones.com/Katie Wall, and just submit, hey, I'd like to start a conversation. An introductory consultation is very easy. You can also email me directly if you'd like. That's very easy, and I can be found on LinkedIn as well. I watch that a little bit less, but just FYI, I am on LinkedIn if you just want to connect in a more informal way.
Oh, fantastic. Well, I'm sure a lot of people will be reaching out to connect because your love comes through and your passion does as well. Whew, what an incredible conversation with Katie Wall. If there's one thing to take away from today, it's this. You only have so many days. The question is, how will you use them? Katie's journey is proof that reinvention isn't just possible, it's necessary. Whether it's career shifts, personal reinvention, or taking a risk on something new, the key is to bet on yourself first. And as Katie reminded us, sometimes restarting means letting go first. If today's conversation spoke to you and you're ready to take control of your financial future, please connect with Katie at Edward Jones, where she helps individuals and businesses plan with intention and confidence. As she mentioned, you can find her on LinkedIn or check out her website, which you can find in our show notes. And remember, you don't have to navigate your pivot alone. If you're ready to stop overthinking and start taking action, let's make it happen together. Head to Pivotista.com and book a free strategy session with me, and let's map out your next chapter. And finally, before you go, do me a quick favor. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to like, subscribe, and leave a review on your favorite podcast platform. Your support helps us reach more women who are ready to step boldly into their next chapter. Until next time, keep pivoting with purpose. I'll see you on the next episode.